In the beginning, I'm lost. Sometimes the site is not beautiful at all. I am inspired when the client is eager about architecture. Now I have studied the site. Now I have a blank page. What can I do? It's much better. After a couple of years in Paris, I wanted to change city one more time. I think it's important to move. I wanted to test myself, and I was very eager to discover on my own the way of creating architecture. When you emphasize the context can emphasize your architecture. Yeah, the envelopes are important for me because it's the filter between outside and inside. You can succeed into doing a fabulous architecture without too much money. I think the politicians currently who don't trust into architecture, they don't trust in the future. It's an architecture which makes you wow. I think architecture is a creation which comes from dialogue a lot. Okay, when are you inspired?
You grew up in a family of architects.
Mhm.
Did you consider other professional options besides becoming an architect?
I don't think so in reality. I mean, I had other ideas, but I went to architecture in a very intuitive way. I had the feeling that there were no other option. Because first of all, my parents both studied architecture, but none of them were architects. My father was more landscaper and urbanist, I mean master planner, and my mother didn't have any architectural practice or not for a long period. So I think I was very curious and I wanted this time to be part of the game, and I wanted absolutely to do this beautiful, I mean, work of being an architect. It was, I think it was without any hesitation, without any doubt. It was, very intuitive, but very sure.
Very short, and I understand that when you were little, you discussed architecture a lot. You traveled quite a bit with your parents.
Yeah, absolutely. I traveled a lot with them, and it was more travels organized around the art because my parents were in love with Italy, and we went a lot of time to discover all the museums. So it was a little bit boring in the beginning, but at a certain point you begin to be used, and you find something, and then it becomes very important for you to be filled with art.
You were born in Marseille and moved to Montpellier
Montpellier.
at age 4, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's a much smaller city. It's not very far. It's about 2 hours west from
Hmm.
Marseille.
Hmm.
It's also in the south of France.
You learned about geography.
Yes. So it's right, by the Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah, yeah.
So was there a particular reason for that move?
Yes, my parents were not too much attached. In fact, they are from the north of France, northeast. So they wanted to move in order just to change, to test other cities. So in a way, I am somebody from the north, but raised in the south, which gives, yeah, I like the mix. The two cities of Marseille and then Montpellier had a great influence on me, I think, because both of them are along the Mediterranean Sea. Both cities have a certain link to the light. The light is always very harsh. The shadows are sculpted. They are very dark. There are a lot of contrasts. I mean, we are not in the Scandinavian countries where everything is smooth. In fact, The cities along in the south, they have a specific light which is very powerful, which emphasizes the colors, and yes, and the light is fabulous. And I'm very attached to the natural light, to the way it can play with the volumes, the architecture precisely. So it's very important for me.
You went to School of Architecture in Montpellier, and I understand that when you first went to study architecture, you didn't tell your parents, right?
No, I didn't. Because precisely they were architects, and I think I was very independent. I was absolutely sure to do that. And I didn't want for them to do advices or perhaps to say, no, it's not a good idea. So yeah, I want to decide that on my own and not to have any critics on that. So yeah, I went to the school and made the submission on my own. And then a few weeks later, I told my parents.
And
And by the way, they were very happy.
they were happy, yes. So you graduated in 1985. How was your experience at the school?
I think I was very frustrated because I don't think it was the best school in the world. And I was frustrated because I think they had a lack of inventivity. Um, and also, I wanted to establish a lot of dialogues with my professors. And I think it was in a period where there was not so open-minded to this type of dialogue on everything, on the architecture itself. I think architecture is a creation which comes from dialogue a lot. And yes, and I felt a lack of dialogue. By the way, the professor in whom I was really the most confident was an artistic professor, not an architecture professor. And in parallel with the studies of architecture, I studied Histoire de l'art, the story of art. And I think it was much more powerful because there were very well-known professors and they had a way to teach which was really to create a relationship with the students and to allow them to have their own thought. And that's the best way to learn, to learn, but in the meantime, to let the student having his freedom to continue the process and to take part of the process, to being part of the process.
When you graduated, was it suggested by any of your professors to go to Paris?
No, it was on my own. I wanted to change city.
And who did you work for?
I worked for several practices, but in a very short period because I wanted really, very soon to create my own practice. And I created it in 1991. I wanted to test myself, and I was very eager to discover on my own the way of creating architecture.
So you had this idea of being independent from the very beginning. So you went to Paris just to get your experience and then back start your practice.
Yeah, exactly.
And why did you do it in Lyon?
After a couple of years in Paris, I wanted to change city one more time. I think it's important to move, but it was a short period too, and I realized that Paris will be my definitive city. And now I can say, after 20 years or a little bit more, that Paris is my best place in the world. I continue traveling a lot, but yes, now I I have created roots in Paris. In the beginning of my practice, it was very difficult to obtain projects in Paris, in the city of Paris. So I had projects all around, but not inside the city. And I think it came with the showroom of Citroen. I think it was my first project in Paris.
Ah, okay, because it was realized some years later, many years later, right?
Yeah. But I mean, 10 years later. Yeah, my first projects were all around Paris, I mean, in France. And yeah, I think the first one inside Paris is really the Citroen showroom.
When you speak about your architecture, you use words and phrases such as unexpected,
Mm,
joyful,
mm,
disobedient,
mhm,
delicate monumentality, powerful volumes,
mm,
opposites of scales, always start with a blank page, beginning in all directions,
mm.
materiality and color before form, and surprising a client. How else would you describe your work? What kind of architecture do you try to achieve?
So if I resume all the words that you have mentioned, which are, I mean, yes, I love all of them, but the resume or the link between all these words would be that I always try to do a contextual architecture. For me, the context is the major priority. And if I have to create a hierarchy, the first hierarchy, I mean, is to create a contextual architecture. Because more you give to the context, more the context gives you back. When you emphasize the context can emphasize your architecture. I want to study about the story of the context, the geography of the context, the weather, the climate, the cultural elements of the context. Because, for example, when I'm working in another city like in Stockholm or in other countries like in Parramatta in Australia, of course, it's not so easy to jump into the context. So I read a lot about the historical, I mean, about the root of the site of the city, and all the history of this city or even the country itself. So it's very important to get a lot of sources of inspirations. And then can emerge an architecture in which I will be confident because everything in the proposal that I will do will be linked to the context. It can be a cultural element of the context. It can be a geographical element of the context. I mean, by the way, it's a lot of different elements, but all of them they inspired me, and then I can choose if the project will be with a contrast of scale or with no contrast of scale, will be really impertinent or not so much, will be playful or more, I mean, delicate, or will be monumental or intimate. I will choose all of these topics after really being deeply inspired by the context.
What about your own context, the context of your own projects? Do you really leave them behind? Because when I look at your work, it's really diverse and it seems like you do start every time from scratch.
Yes, sometimes I try because you know that our job is made for with a lot of competitions that we lose and then some of them we win. So there are so many ideas that we lose in a way. And sometimes I try to reuse one idea from another project because I feel that the contexts are similar or the program is similar, but each time it doesn't work because there is always something which is different. The scale, the program, the size of the project. So I think it's not possible to reuse concepts. I mean, but I'm not saying that our projects are so much totally different from the previous one. I think that there is a link because when I'm discussing with, for example, architectural critics, they say that there is a link between all my projects because they have a sort of outside study of my architecture and they feel that there is an invisible link between them. So there is, yes, I also feel that. But reusing it's not a good idea. I think we fill our memory and our creativity with a lot of ideas which are added. I mean, it's it's making a big pot of ideas. So I don't reuse, but at a certain moment there are so many ideas, and I know how. I mean, which one to pick and to restore back in the project. But yes, I'm to resume. I always want to begin with a blank page. So it's better to, yeah, to have the courage to say, now I have studied the site. Now I have a blank page. What can I do? It's much better. It's much more sensitive.
And you just mentioned that you discuss your work with the critics and they see a kind of link between your projects. So what do they say? What's the link?
I think the context precisely, the inventivity, and perhaps a specific work on the envelopes. Yeah, the envelopes are important for me because it's the filter between outside and inside, so between the context and the program. It's the first, I mean, when you see at the first glance an architecture, the first element that you will see will be the volume and the envelope. So you need immediately to attract and to create a link with the future user. So the filter is important. It's also a way to diffract the natural light, the famous natural light. It's a way to be porous. So the link is yeah, the contextuality, the way to play with the filters, the facades, the envelopes, and to make them really the skin between outside and inside, between the users and the neighbors, the program and the city. And also there is another link, I mean another yeah, link between all my projects. It's about the public spaces. And I think more I'm working on architecture, more I think that the notion of public space is crucial. And each of the building that architects we are doing, creating, each building has to respect the public space in front of us and even has to improve the quality of the public space.
Could you talk about your design process and how do you typically start a project? What are your initial steps?
So the initial steps, first of all, is to study the site, but in a very scientific way. I mean, I'm not just improvising. I'm really looking at reading at books, searching about a lot of previous analysis on the site itself, on the region, on the city. Then I like to write a lot and to sketch in parallel. I'm also very intuitive. I draw a lot. I draw a lot with only pencils or with colors, of course, because I love colors. Yeah, so it's in the same time a sort of scientific research, but in the same time I write in an intuitive way. Some notes, I take a lot of notes, and I draw. I draw a lot. I like to sketch because I think there is a specific link between the head and the hand, and I love that. And then I was speaking in the beginning of the interview. I also like to discuss a lot because I like to discuss with my team, with my partner. Um, as soon as I begin to have ideas, I like to share them in order to get the feeling, in order to see the reaction. Because I think as an artist, when you begin a project, you are always stressed. Myself, I'm always stressed. I'm not confident, and I need to share because the simple fact of sharing and of explaining your ideas, it makes them more clear. I mean, you you begin to organize your own ideas when you have to explain to somebody. It cannot be confused. You need to clarify your own mind.
You just mentioned that you don't feel confidence. You
Mm.
don't feel being confident in the beginning. So what brings confidence?
It comes. It comes always later on, uh, but never immediately. And I become progressively confident always. Yeah, but it can be a long process.
And when you draw, do you draw continuously, or is it always related to your projects, your immediate projects, or is it both?
It's both, of course. It's both. It's both because, for example, when I see an exhibition, I can be inspired by a painter or a sculptor. So yeah, I also like to take some notes and to do some sketches. But I could say that yeah, the majority of my drawings are linked to the projects. I can also say that even when a project is conceived or the concept is here, I continue drawing because I like also to draw a concept when I have the feeling that the concept is ready, but while drawing, I discover something else. So I draw continuously. It helps developing the project, having new ideas, modifying a project until it's finished. I continue drawing always.
And you said you're making notes. So what kind of notes? Because in one of the interviews, you said that you are a storyteller.
Yeah, I think it's very important to take notes. I mean, I like to explain a project to a client or to a city. I mean, I like to explain it with drawings, but also with powerful words, with poetic words. Um, I think the words are important. It helps a lot expressing the root of a concept. I think nothing can replace a drawing, but also nothing can replace a small text expressing your your architecture. I remember when I did the LAM, which is the extension, the refurbishment and the extension of the Modern Art Museum in Lille. The existing building was made by Roland Simonet. And because I had to refurbish his building, but also to extend it, I wanted absolutely, one more time, to discover his architecture, to read a lot about his architecture, to understand deeply why he did the volumes like that and not like that. Everything. I wanted to understand everything. So I read a lot and I realized that I understood things while reading that I could never understand without this time spent to read about his architectural work. So, meaning that when you discover an architecture from somebody, you feel it. I mean, you are submerged by his architecture. So you get a lot of emotion, which is fantastic. It's about architecture getting emotion. But when you read about the architecture later on, you discover something else.
Your hobbies include photography and painting. If you could talk about your inspirations.
Yes, I'm very inspired by art. And I can say that it depends of the project, it depends of the period, but I have seen exhibitions. It can be painters from the 15th century, or it can be modern art, or it can be contemporary art. But each time I have the feeling to learn a lot. And there are art pieces which give me really a strong memory. And after that, I can be inspired by these art pieces later on in a new project. And I'm also, of course, inspired by photography. And I think it's deeply a form of art.
You said that in the office, we only do projects we love and in which we see that we can express something that is really essential. If you could touch on that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a luxury. It's not snob when I say that. But yes, I always wanted to keep a sort of intermediate scale in the office. I always wanted to only do the projects in which I am inspired. And you could say, okay, when are you inspired? I am inspired when the client is eager about architecture, when the client is open-minded. Um, it's not a question of size. It's not a question of location. It's not a question of cost. I could say, of course, I prefer to do luxury projects than too much affordable projects. But no, it's not also a question of that, because I think when the client is clever, when the client is confident, when the client trusts you, and in the meantime, the project is very affordable because he doesn't have so many money. But you can succeed into doing a fabulous architecture without too much money. It's a question of relationship between the client and the architect. But when the client is open-minded, when the client is trusting you, I have the feeling to have the freedom to invent something which can be the best.
Could you talk about a few of the examples of your projects that you see as real highlights in the career? Maybe several buildings, such as Citroen Showroom, that probably became the turning point in your
Yeah.
career, and maybe if you could mention a few of those.
Yes, after Citroën the showroom, there was two very important projects, which were the LAM, the museum, modern art museum in Lille, where we had to refurbish, but also to create an extension for the outsider art. Now I can say that I am a fan of refurbishments since this moment, which was more than 20 years ago. I discovered that 1 + 1 don't give you two, it gives you 3 or even 4, because it's always this idea of improving so much that you can create magical things. And I think, for example, speaking about the modern art museum in Lille, I think we refurbished the existing museum in a very delicate way. Then we created this extension, which has its own personality. It was important. So there is a sort of very deep dialogue today between the existing building made by Roland Simonet and mine. It frames a little bit more the park because both projects are in a very beautiful park. So it gives a sort of frame, an improved frame to the park, and also in terms of content. In this museum, you have a modern art, a contemporary art, and this outsider art collection. So there were three collections, and in the beginning, in the brief, we had to separate them carefully. And I didn't want that. I wanted to mix because, of course, Dubuffet, who was a famous French modern artist, he was inspired by outsider art as well as Picasso, as well as so many of them. So I wanted to express the links and the inspiration between the artists all together. And I decided to mix the three forms of arts. And yeah, finally, it was so successful. We are currently doing a couple of projects in Albania,
In Tirana.
in Tirana, and along the coastline, because the country is currently in an amazing moment. There is a moment currently where politicians want to have beautiful architecture in order to help the country uh, improving the global quality and yeah, and the Prime Minister Edi Rama is fan of architecture and is really sure and that architecture can help a whole country to uh, to be more beautiful, to be more attractive, to help people accompanying the new way of living, of working, of um, doing, leisure activities. And I think currently in our world, you don't have so many politicians who are convinced that architecture is a key element in a country. And I think Albania is a huge example of that currently. I was part of the festival that they did in the beginning of June. And I think the festival was so successful because when you show that you are eager into architecture, it's a way to show that you are confident with the future. I think the politicians currently who don't trust into architecture, they don't trust in the future. I think architects, yes, we are storytellers who have to accompany the, the history. And I must say that I think we are a crucial part of our society to help the city being better, being more beautiful, being more sustainable. I mean, I think we are a key element of that, one of the key elements. And you don't have so many politicians who are sure of that and who trust architects.
A lot of architects are now saying that architecture is not art. It's all about what's going to happen inside. They are more concerned with social integration and sustainability and so many other non-directly related to architecture issues. Also affordability. What do you think? Would you say architecture is art?
I think it's a little bit simplist to say that if architecture is affordable, oriented human needs, and sustainable, then architecture cannot be an art. I think architecture has to be both. Architecture has to deal with sustainability, of course. It's the first top hierarchy. It has to deal with needs, the human needs. Of course, it's the first priority. But it has also to deal with beauty, meaning with a form of poetry and form of art. It has to deal with both. It's not a simple job. And I think that you see so many projects which are finished, built, and you have the people who explain about this project, oh, it's so much sustainable, it's affordable, the program is respected, the needs are, perfect inside. Yes, but when you look at the project which is built, it's not beautiful at all. So it means that it's not attractive, it's not perenne, and it's not the way to improve the quality of our cities. So it's not good at all. And of course, it's so simple to respect the program, to respect the budget, and to respect some standard labels. Sustainable labels. It's very simple. But when you want to do more, to bring something else, to bring a memory for the inhabitants, to bring them flexibility, to bring them unexpected spaces inside, to bring them generosity, a specific link to urban and public spaces. When do you want to bring them natural ventilation, which is not always accepted by the labels, by the way, by the standardization of the labels. So when you want to be more inventive, I think that is our real goal as architects, to do more than respecting labels, programs, costs. We are here to do much more, much more. And in that, I'm telling that architecture is a form of art, because the first, we need to respect numbers given by the program and the costs, but then we have to improve them with creativity, and the sustainability cannot be only a question of numbers.
Who are some of the architects that influenced you? In one of the talks, you mentioned Ricardo Bofill.
Yeah.
So I wonder why exactly, and who else?
Now, I was speaking about Ricardo Bofill because when I studied in Montpellier, we did our first architecture travel in Barcelona, and we saw the taller the architecture had from Ricardo Bofill. I was really impressed. And we learned a lot about Ricardo Bofill, so it was a sort of scholar work. But my first emotion speaking about architecture was when I did a travel on my own, and I decided to do a worldwide travel. So I went to Australia and I visited the opera. And it had a huge impact on me because I was coming from Europe, so a small country filled with smaller countries. And the scale in Europe is quite most part of the time relatively small. So when I arrived in Sydney, I discovered the bay, which is huge, the opera, which was huge, the boats, which were huge. I was totally astonished, and yeah, it was a shock for me because I fall in love with the opera from Jorn Utzon, because for me it was the first time I discovered a very contextual architecture. It's monumental while contextual because in a way it's mimicking the size of the boats. It's perfectly scaled with the size of the bay, and it's an architecture which makes you wow. It's I mean it was very emotional. So I was inspired by all his work because I studied a lot everything he did, the small scale houses he did in Mallorca, and of course the opera in Sydney and all his work. And then I was also very inspired by Rem Koolhaas, of course, because one more time there is the result of the architecture, but also the way he speaks about architecture, and most part of the time in a very impertinent way, which is unexpected.
Do you see a connection between your project in Parramatta and the Opera House and Utzon in general?
No, but I have another example to mention. I must say my favorite building in Paris is the Centre Georges Pompidou from Piano and Rogers. For me, this building is the most beautiful one in Paris because it's impertinent. There is a sort of, it's totally unexpected. It's you have the feeling that it doesn't respect any regulation, full of colors, while Paris is gray. But in the same time, for me, it feels inside the site in a perfect way. It's very sustainable because it has shown a huge amount of flexibility over the several decades. It's a building which is hugely attractive still now. But yes, coming back to Parramatta, I must say that I remember when the competition was organized, the site which was given to the competitors was a double. And Piano and Rogers decided just to fulfill the 50% of the site, and then the rest, so 50%, was empty, kept empty in order to create a public space. And the Centre Georges Pompidou would never be the beautiful sculpture it is if Piano and Rogers didn't decide to create the square, the plaza in front of it. There is this sort of mirror between them. And in fact, I think in a very intuitive way, I tried to do the same in Parramatta because there were no public space at all. And I was involved into creating a magnificent cultural equipment, but it was open on a site which was nothing. It was not a square, it was not an esplanade, it was not a street, it was an empty space. And I wanted to create a sort of plaza. And all the goal came from that. The idea of creating in the same time a square and a building. It's the reason also why the building is sculpted to accompany the sun course. And all the slabs, all the levels are with setbacks. It's like a theater. So it means that all the levels of the library are having a view on the square. There is a perspective and a visual link for the users of the library with the users of the square, which is very important. The building is transparent. So the building is like a theater with all the rows, and the square is like a stage. It's a very theatrical way of doing architecture. And I think for that I was inspired by the Centre Georges Pompidou. It's a genius building. Also, it's playful.
You said as architects, we need a lot of constraints to be creative.
Yeah, absolutely. We need. Absolutely. Yeah, it's more easy because the constraints help you finding your way between them. When you don't have any of them, because the root of my architecture is to be contextual. And when I don't have any context, um, it's more difficult. In Parramatta, it was because the context was not beautiful. But for example, when I have a site which is not inside a city or close to a city, in the beginning I'm lost. I like to work in cities or in a place which is sculpted either by the city, either by the landscape. But a flat place without anything surrounding you, I feel uncomfortable and I have a lack of constraint. But I always try to find some of them. It's more difficult, but I need to succeed.
You teach architecture. How do you do that?
I think it's very important to teach uh, architecture with a sort of openness spirit because you need to help the students getting a frame about the goals of the architecture, the social goals, the philosophical goals, the symbolic goals, because I forgot to speak about symbolism. But you need also to let them building their own mentality and character, their own personality. It's very important uh, because I think it's very important for an architecture to reflect the personality of the man or the woman who created the architecture. And I think when you teach to young students, you need to help them sculpting their own personality while giving them a frame, but the frame has to be open-minded. They have to deal with the frame of all the ambitions of the architecture, but they have also to deal with their own personality, which is quite new. They are like sponges in the beginning. So they have also a lot of way in order to find their own personality. It's not easy for them. And if you want for them to be really creative in a very intellectual way, I mean sensitive way, you need to help them finding their own way. It's not your way, it's their own way that they have to find. So it's difficult. You need to be delicate in a way.
I wonder if you ever, when you start a project, go back to your own archive of projects that you developed years before and try to resurrect them and change them and, sometimes change the program, change the scale, change something else, but really bring it
Hmm.
alive.
No,
No.
first of all, I'm not past oriented. Of course, the past is a part of your personality, but it has to be in the back of your personality. I'm not past oriented, so I don't like to look at my archive, the past projects, the one that I've not built or the one that, yeah, I don't like that. Um, I prefer much more, for example, to see a new exhibition, to visit a new building, to travel, discovering new cities, new projects. I prefer to be like a sponge, facing the world in which we are enveloped.
And finally, I want to ask you about one of your quotes. You said that I'm always trying to improve the program.
Yeah. Of course.
You could touch on that.
Yeah, I think it's very important because the architecture is not only doing a sort of box for a program. It's not pretentious, but I think that most part of the clients, they are not as creative as architects. So they have, of course, a program, but most part of the time, it's a sort of classical program. And I think it's very important for architects to work on the program itself in order to deal with it, to modify it slightly, to improve it anyway. I think the job of an architect is also to improve the program because there are functions which are often missing. There is a way to organize the different elements of the program, which is not enough ambitious. You need to deal with the flexibility, and most part of the clients, they don't anticipate this type of notion. And also, I like to mix the functions. I like sometimes to add functions that was not part of the program at all. But when I really deeply work on the program, I have ideas regarding the functions. And when really I mean, it's a question of appropriating ourselves the program. We need to have a work on it in order to appropriate ourselves the program, to make it more comfortable, more ambitious, more innovative, more sustainable in a way. And when we work on that enough, and when we show our work to a client, he is always convinced because we bring value to a project. We had a project in Montpellier where the client wanted only to have hotels and offices, and we decided to integrate apartments. Of course, we were facing a railway station, and all the cities are currently facing a sort of lack of housings and apartments. So we wanted to densify a little bit more the program with apartments, but it was a very good idea because the mix was even more clever and rich. We had all the inhabitants, I mean the users, who were mixed in this beautiful architecture. They had the possibility all to meet in a sort of belvedere. We did. So the first time I saw the client, I said, I explained in detail why, how, etc. And so I said, yes, I propose to add a lot of apartments. And he was immediately convinced because I think that as architect, we have also a social opinion, political in a way. I mean, we can be a little bit politician. And the mayor and the client are always easily convinced when we have a very good argue and when we really try to anchor their project even better in the city. Yes, so we need to improve all programs.
Thank you.